Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today on brand and culture, leveraging culture to build a more dynamic brand. My name is Nisha Singh, and I'm the producer of today's event. Before we dive in, I just wanted to go over some technical details, pretty self-explanatory, but nonetheless, just some gentle reminders. By default, you are on mute as you join the webinar, so accessible below is a chat function, and if you have any questions throughout the course of the webinar or any technical difficulties, please feel free to send it on to me. Accordingly, we will be fielding the questions and sending it on to the presenters. Of course, don't worry about taking copious notes. We'll be sharing a short link of the presentation with everyone, including any handouts and relevant links following the webinar. And so without further ado, I'm excited to introduce Tony Wessling. He is the co-founder and managing principal of Chromium, strategic branding firm based here in San Francisco with an office in Washington, D.C. Tony works with an organization's leadership to craft strategic branding initiatives to help develop vibrant cultures and support durable brands. All that's to say he's pretty knowledgeable in many facets of branding culture. And before I pass on the baton to Tony, I just want to send another reminder for those that have just joined that please feel free to use your Q&A or chat function below, and I'd be happy to help field any questions.
Thank you,
Tony?
Nisha. Thank you very much. I'd also like to welcome Peter Van Artryk, who is the principal of our Washington, D.C. office. Peter, are you on?
Yes, sir. Hello, everybody.
Well, welcome. And welcome to all of you. Looking forward to an informative and I hope entertaining and interesting webinar. Let me tell you a little bit about Chromium. Chromium is a strategic branding consultancy. We focus on building brands that have a base in culture. And that is interesting in that when we first started this company, we thought, what could really symbolize a vibrant culture that also has a really vivid, shining brand on the outside? And we came across the fact that the element chromium, when it's in its elemental state, is the metal that we all know that is on bumpers, that resists corrosion, that is highly reflective, very, very specular, very bright. And yet when it's combined with other elements, it's the only element in the entire periodic table that can form every color of the spectrum. And we thought that's exactly what a great brand is. It's shiny and bright on the outside, and it's multi-hued and vivid on the inside. And so that's why we call ourselves Chromium. And our vision is that the companies that are doing the hard work out there, that are solving the big problems, they need to be known and they need to be successful. And that's our job. At Chromium, we help these innovator brands, as we call them, get the fame and fortune they deserve so that they can do their work and make the world a better place. And so that brings us to our subject for today, fusing culture into brand to have an exponentially more powerful force to work with. So let's talk about brand and culture. A study by the Human Capital Institute found that culture-focused companies have a 17% higher net operating margin. The Harvard Business Review has an article in which they say it can be as high as 30%. That's due to lower turnover, a reputation attracting better talent, more efficient operations because of engaged employees, and also lower costs because to replace a valuable employee can take 3 to 5 times their salary. I've heard as much as 4 to 6 times their salary. So you can imagine if you have somebody who's making $100,000 a year and you have to replace them, well, that's $300,000 minimum hit to your cost, to your margin. Imagine if 2 of those people leave. Suddenly you're in big trouble. So having a great culture that attracts and retains talent and is efficient and effective is a very, very important thing. There's also a McKinsey study that showed that strong brands outperform weak ones by 20%. They chalk that up to increased efficiency as well. but lower customer acquisition costs, stronger customer loyalty, and premium pricing support. They've even found that investors will stick with strong brands even when they're not performing very well. So that shows you that if people who are completely concerned about money will stick with a brand because they believe in it, there's something deeper happening there. So how do we make the most of this? How do we build a strong culture that informs a strong brand to increase profits? Because what you've probably noticed in your company, if you are on the corporate side or if you're on the agency side, your clients, you've probably noticed that HR tends to own brand, HR tends to own culture, while marketing tends to own brand. This is a problem because they're quite far apart very often. HR and marketing don't talk in most companies. In some companies they do. And here at Chromium, we believe that these two things need to be brought together because brand and culture are like a continuum, right? If you have a strong culture but a weak brand, you'll have anemic growth because there's very little awareness and trust in the marketplace. But if you have a strong brand and a weak culture, well, then the company probably won't last long because you'll be inefficient and the customer experience won't be that good. So we believe that it needs to be cohesive, that it needs to be this continuum, that brand and culture need to be in the same place. Now, it doesn't matter whether the company we're talking about here is a big company, a big corporate culture, or if it's a startup, all right, or a middle market company. It doesn't matter whether you sell products or services. It doesn't matter if you're B2B or B2C. Branding from the inside out is one of the most important drivers of success for any company. Mainly to us, it means thinking and operating like an innovator, as we call it, an innovator brand, rejecting the status quo. As we like to say, a Quo Brand. Peter, we've run across many brands in our travels here with Chromium and in our previous business professional lives. What's some of the main things you notice between an innovator brand and a Quo brand?
Yeah, most companies actually are status quo or quo thinkers, and I think it's probably 5% of the universe that's innovator thinking. And the main areas that I've seen, basically four buckets of things. First, it's leadership. Second, it's an understanding of the strategy behind brand. Third, it's social engagement, which for many people still means tactically social media, but in fact, in innovator brands, it's much more of a social business thinking. And then finally, culture. And those four areas, brand, culture, leadership, and engagement, is where we see the separation. And we hopefully will be able to talk more about transformational leadership as distinct from transactional leadership, which we see at status quo brands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, speaking of transformational leadership, there's a story I read about how when Starbucks was having a little bit of a falter in their brand step, Howard Schultz, the CEO, didn't go on an advertising offensive or spiff up the logo or redo the stores. He actually closed the stores for an afternoon so that he could speak directly with the managers and the associates there to talk about values and culture and how they could work there on the store level to change the customer experience. So this is branding from the inside out, right? So I've been hearing a lot lately about an online startup called Medium. They are a custom content aggregator. And what's remarkable about them is not what they do from a business perspective, but how they're organized. They're in a holacracy. And a holacracy is a team of teams, as General Stanley McChrystal calls it in his book, where there's people who work across several different teams, which breeds a lot of creativity, a lot of trust, and makes it so that there's no weak link in the organization because there's always somebody who knows what's going on. And I know that you've read that book too, Peter. We've discussed that.
Yeah, it's a really good book about how the military needs to evolve from just being again, sort of silo-driven versus cross-functional teams organized around a task, whether it's temporary or a permanent task or an emergency or not an emergency. And that same, to me, that applies well to the corporate world where silos need to break down. And successful and innovative organizations are finding that work itself is changing given the interest of the millennial generation, the 95 million plus millennials entering the workforce, who really enjoy these sort of SWAT teams of employees and consultants who are organized around specific jobs, not just working in their own little silos on specific things that are not related to each other. It's part, I think, what Crystal was talking about was part of really a broader trend of how work is shifting.
Yeah, there's a lot more dynamism in these teams of teams. It really it makes for a more vibrant culture, and it also then shows in the brand because the customer experience is so much better. Mm-hmm. I think that you mentioned the military, and they're a great example of. They're changing now, but they're kind of in the past had been emblematic of what we call the Quo Brand, and Quo Brands have a lot of rules, right? There's big thick rule books and all sorts of guidelines, and you do this but don't do that kind of prescriptions for the people who are in those organizations. They have a rule for everything in some companies, right? How you dress, how you precisely use the logo and the colors, and how you there's always a script as to what you say to customers. Don't deviate from the script, right? They tell you when to arrive, when to leave, how exactly a dispute with somebody in your company is handled, and no other way. And the fact of the matter is that these are rules that nobody really reads, and let alone understands or follows intuitively. So, having them is just a weight on the culture. And you mentioned silos, Peter. These companies are insular, right? They are siloed. They're the epitome of siloed. Nobody knows what anyone else is doing or why. The communications are on this what they dismissively call a need-to-know basis. I find that really toxic. It breeds rumors and distrust. You also find that these insular companies are really obsessed with competitors. They're not thinking about what the customer needs. They're thinking about what their competitor is doing, and they're always trying to do something to get their competitor. It's really a backwards way of thinking. And I think that, and you've seen this, Peter, these places are lonely, right? You go in there and it's dead quiet. No one's laughing, no one's visiting. There's very little interaction. It's like a mortuary. You see all these cubicles stretched out for miles, and nobody's saying anything. I was at a government bureaucratic office the other day doing some business. It was exactly like that. It was dead quiet. It was awful. Terrible places. And you also find that in these kinds of organizations, there's a lot of disrespect, right? Only certain people are allowed to have the ideas. Nobody else is allowed to speak. There are politics everywhere, right? Bad mouthing, backbiting, blaming, all the bad B words are there. And the fact of the matter is that there's very little clarity as to how you might get ahead in a company like that. It's not. There rarely are they meritocracies. Very, very bad environments. So when you have all these things, it's the perfect storm, and it's no wonder that the turnover in these companies is high. It's no wonder that there's so much inefficiency when people don't communicate, right? It's no wonder that the brand identity is so dull because there's no creativity there. There's no innovation. It's all perfectly predictable. But that's not what we want for our clients, is it, Peter? What is it that we're looking for the Chromium clients, and why we advocate branding from the inside out? Because we are trying to foment growth.
Yes, growth.
Growth it is. So, these. What you notice is that people desire growth. They desire purpose in their life. People admire quality in products and services, and they want to produce that quality. They want to help make the world a better place. That's why when you have a great culture driving a brand, it ends up in growth. It ends up in purpose. Let's talk a little bit about culture. That's the basis of this, because culture drives brand, not the other way around. And so, the components of culture, of a corporate culture, are very much like the components of a regular human culture, right? A city or a country. Culture is a people, right? A like-minded people who have gathered together. They're a good fit for each other. They have complementary talents. They all have developed a set of practices. These are the rules, the customs, the behaviors, the processes, the protocols, the policies, all the other P words. And speaking of P words, these are all places. Right? They're very, very much places. You go to Silicon Valley, go to any place here in Silicon Valley, and you see these, see tech guys hanging around, right? It's always technology companies. Out there in DC, what do you have, Peter?
Out there in DC, out here we have a lot of military and political operatives who are in these concrete bunkers, Tony. But,
yeah, it's politics, right? That's the business out there.
Yes.
And so all the people who are interested in politics are out there. And all the people who are not entirely clearly, but so many people who are interested in technology are out here in Silicon Valley. That's people, like-minded people just like to be together. And that's place. And if you look at their workspaces, it tells a lot too. You go into a tech company and it's always open. There's lots of kooky stuff on people's desks and a lot of, sort of personal expressions. Whereas you go into a very corporate, slick, law firm, it's all buttoned down and it's very, very, very tight, very structured. Not a whole lot of personal expression there. So places is an indicator of culture. Values, of course, are the center of any culture. That's the vision that culture has for the future, the mission that they're on. What are they doing while they're here on this earth? What are we doing, right? Shared beliefs. Oftentimes in real life, that's a religion, but more often in the business world, it's methodology, it's theories, it's ideas, it's creativity. Almost all cultures have a narrative, right? America has a pretty clear narrative, right? The revolutionary pioneer spirit of America is a very compelling narrative. And that's a narrative is the collective story. It's the words you use to describe who you are, and what we call the brand lexicon, because words are very important. So in companies, they have what we call a brand lexicon. Those are the words that people use. They're very, very telling. Cultures also produce artifacts. Ancient cultures have left behind pottery shards and works of art and works of literature. Brands do the same thing. They have products and services. They produce knowledge. They produce monuments. So great buildings are produced by great brands. Look at what Apple's doing, right, with that big spaceship building that they're building. Also the one of the artifacts is compensation. Cultures have their own money, right? So what is the compensation in a corporate culture? It could be pay, it could be stock options, it could be PTO. These are all artifacts, though, that the culture leaves behind. Now, the most important thing about culture, about values rather, is that they need to be driven by consensus, right? You can't just make up a list of values and say, these are the values that you're all going to follow. That's a dictatorship. That's not a very healthy culture. And and those values need to be codified. So they need to be written down, right? This is an important part of branding from the inside out, is to focus on these core values and then codify them, write them down, and distribute them freely. Right now we've got up on here, this is the Declaration of Independence. Now, imagine if they had just signed the Declaration of Independence or the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and never distributed it, never talked about it. Where would our country be today? Nowhere. You have to make sure that you freely share these things that you codify, so that everybody knows what you stand for. A really great example of that is this company called Hubspot. They're a co-working startup, and they have what they call their culture code. And that culture code is 7 very, very straightforward, plain language values. And this is all anybody would ever need to know to work at HubSpot, right? They can make great decisions about almost anything they're doing, and not have to go and ask permission to do something, not have to inquire as to whether this is the right direction. By having this culture code, you empower employees to make autonomous decisions, and that's really very important. Because when you've got a company that's values driven, people don't need those thick manuals. They don't need guidelines. They don't need to ask permission. They can operate, communicate, and make decisions all in relation to the values that they not only understand, but subscribe to and believe in. So the result is, of course, it's more efficiency, more personal achievement, more autonomy, right? Leadership, what leadership mainly needs to do is to uphold the values, but they don't need to micromanage these individuals. So Zappos, of course, is a great example of a company that's driven by culture. Just sitting here back behind me is a box that came from Zappos just today. My wife ordered shoes for our kids, and here they are. They showed up at my office. So it's very interesting about Zappos. Tony Hsieh, the CEO, he's famous for building a company around culture, which I suppose you would have to do if you wanted to start a shoe delivery company in the middle of Nevada, or wherever they are. Is that right? Yes, Las Vegas, Nevada. That's right. So Zappos they have a culture yearbook that everybody contributes to. And they have this set of values that are really remarkable. They're not the typical corporate cliches. They're really authentic expressions of the Zappos culture. I mean, look at these. This is not the customer is always right. Be on time and be courteous. This is authentic language. And I think that what we always suggest is that you look at generic values and you determine which generic values are the ones you want to have your culture be about, or that your culture is about. And then from those generic values, we suggest that you do a workshop where you make those values more authentic to your culture. You customize them. And again, everyone from leadership to the guy working in the warehouse can look at this and have everything they need to know about how to work at Zappos, how to deal with customers, how to build the website, what to say in a press release. It's all driven by culture. And what that ends up doing is building trust within the team, right? So building trust within your team is central to having a really great culture. So a lot of these companies that we call Innovator brand companies spend a lot of time building trust. Here's two examples. Nationwide Insurance and Udemy, which is a small e-learning startup. So we all know Nationwide, right? They're on our side. But they decided that in order to really live that credo, the president and COO, a guy named Mark Pritzi, convened a council of associates so that he could get direct feedback from people who are in the field, who are actually having to be on the side of the policyholder to learn what kind of issues and challenges they're facing and which direction they think the company should go in, because he knows that if he just relies on management to tell him what's going on, they'll filter out the bad stuff. They'll ignore potentially ignore some of the innovative ideas. So he goes direct to the associates. Of course, he still listens to his management as well, but he gets both sides of the story this way. And at Udemy, they do it in a much more personal fashion, where every week there's a day where you can come and have donuts with Dennis, and Dennis is Dennis Yang, who's the CEO, and so he welcomes anybody to come and have a donut and coffee with him and discuss whatever it is that they want to discuss. So donuts with Dennis, or the Council of Associates, both of these are ways to build trust within the team. Then there's development. Peter, you mentioned millennials. They're not just looking for a job, are they?
No, there's a lot more they're looking for. They're certainly looking for community, and they're looking to learn, and they're looking to give back. All these things are happening in culture building innovator brands.
Yes, and because at work now, they're looking for an experience. It's not just a job. It's not just a career. They want experience, as you say, purpose. They want to learn. They want growth. They want to give back. And so companies that are branding from the inside out, make this part of the program. They teach people new skills. They give them new experiences. They present them with opportunities to grow as a person and a professional. And that even though that is an expense, and you would think that it would lead to a lack of efficiency, it actually breeds efficiency. It energizes people. It gives them new ideas and new ways to help the customer, and that really comes through in the brand.
Well, Tony, just not to put too fine a point on it, but I wouldn't say it's part of the program. I think it has to be the program.
Yeah.
It's not just we have this once a year we go to a park and we do a cleanup in the park. I mean, that's fine. That's the old way. Now it's actually a centerpiece to recruiting. To be a good employment brand, and then once they're on board, this whole idea of engaging and building trust with giving back, but all the other things that you mentioned, it's got to be central to the program, not part of the program. Is the point.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you, Peter. And another central piece is recognition. You wouldn't believe something as simple as telling somebody "you rock." It's not difficult, but you'd be surprised how high it ranks in the reasons why a good employee quits. They often say it's because, nobody ever told me I was doing a good job. Nobody ever said thank you. Nobody ever recognized the things I was doing for the company. That's remarkable. That's remarkable. It's so easy to do, such a simple gesture, and yet it's so often overlooked. In fact, Peter, I think that we should do a little survey.
Cool.
You get onto your little survey tool there. How often were you and other people around you thanked or recognized at your company? Even how often did that happen? And the numbers are coming in. Looks like people are 15%, not at all. 46%, only once, right? 13% twice, and only 1/5 of the people on this webinar were ever thanked publicly or recognized for their achievement in a week. Can you imagine that? This is a problem. So this is clearly a problem everywhere. So a culture of gratitude, very, very important. And you can see also people want to, this is also overlooked, it's people love clarity. They want to know what the path is, where they're going, what's going on. Where are we going as a company? Where am I going as an employee? People want to know what is the true financial health of the company. What's their career path if at some point they decide that they love this company, they want to stay? What if they decide to leave? What's going to happen to them then? Will they be treated as a pariah? Will they be shown the door? I think that we've all heard these stories where the second you say you're going to, you give your 2 weeks notice, HR shows up with a box and you get escorted past security. That's some pretty ugly stuff, and that's what Quo Brands do. So frequent two-way communications on all these subjects: financial health of the company, career paths, former employees. These are essential between managers and team members if you're going to be branding from the inside out. A good example of this is at LinkedIn, where 2 weeks after you leave LinkedIn, whatever the circumstances, probably unless they're terribly egregious, you get an invitation, a personal invitation from Reid Hoffman, asking you to join the LinkedIn Alumni group. So you're always part of this culture. They recognize that you gave part of you to this company, and so you now have this group where you can essentially know that you were part of something important, where they can continue to draw on your talents, and you can draw on the talents and support of other people in the group. This is tremendously important. So the question is, we know that building a strong culture is really important, but how do you measure this? How do you know? How do you figure out if the culture is good or not, especially when a company starts to get above, a couple dozen employees? How do you really tell? You can't hide behind the water cooler and listen all the time. How do you know which specific departments might need a boost, or a particular manager needs some training? How do you know what that training should be, what that boost should be, what initiatives you should take? So, Peter, you always say to me, if you can measure it, you can manage it, right?
Yes. Yes, I do.
and I try and follow. I try to follow that advice. So how do you measure something as vague as culture? I can tell you, and Peter, you tell me, what do you think of the annual employee survey?
Well, it's most people hate it, and it's one of those things that's long. It's always seems to be inconvenient. People feel like they're going to be ratted out if they really speak the truth. It's looking back in the past. It's HR stuff like, what do you think about our new 401k? And look, that stuff's important, but it can't capture forward-thinking, on-the-spot kind of thinking that culture, as culture evolves. It's
That's
like
right.
an artifact of the past. But the main issue I have with them, Tony, is that it's about trust. If you really want to know the truth, people will give you the truth if they feel there won't be any repercussions.
Right.
But the
Confidential.
employee survey, that to me, it isn't very useful anymore.
Yeah. Well, I agree. The annual survey, you're asking somebody to sit down and for 90 minutes think about what happened 365 days ago, and is that even relevant anymore? And so if you do uncover a problem, you're fixing something that's been festering for 6 to 8 months or longer. Things are happening in the here and now. And the fact of the matter is that there are easier and better ways to measure this stuff. I mean, if you have a small company, you can just do a quarterly, monthly survey monkey, right? Confidential. It's easy enough. You don't need to do this giant survey. Do it more often, fewer questions, more insights. There are also a whole host of new mobile tools that are just awesome. Round Peg, Culture Amp, and Tiny Pants, Tiny Pulse. Those are just a few. We actually developed a proprietary mobile app. We call it Culture Pulse. And this is a very intuitive, light survey. It only takes a few seconds for people to do. It's fun. Most of all, it provides tremendous insight to everyone in the company. It shows you where you stand as a team member in relation to the rest of the culture. And it shows collectively how everybody's feeling, right? It's completely anonymous. So you don't have to feel like you're going to get ratted out, as Peter says. And it tells you, look at this. It shows, hey, this is how I feel. This is how everybody else feels. So then you have something to talk about with somebody, right? And it starts this conversation. Is this me? Is it my problem? Is it the company's problem? What am I going to do about it? Am I just going to accept it? Am I going to be an activist? Am I going to advocate for change? So this is an important thing. It's fun, right? We made it so that you can choose these words, so that you can say, hey, look how the company's feeling right now, right? So people like to see this. They like to talk about it. We even have one client who has suggested that they put this on a big screen in the lobby of the company, which I thought was pretty good. So that's, just knowing right away how people feel is so important. Let's do another quick survey. Okay. On a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being you completely dread it, and 5 being you're totally excited, let's see. Well, this is stacking up interestingly, huh? Luckily, nobody totally dreads this. At least not yet. No, nobody totally dreads it. 21% kind of dread it, are not too happy with this. About 30% are 21%. 20% love their job. They probably also are the ones who get thanked. So this is important. Now, as a leader, if any of you are in leadership roles who are on the webinar, it's your job to fix this stuff. Once you know it's broken, if you've asked the question and you've gotten the answer that something's broken, you better fix it. This is what people are looking. Again, this is trust. You're building trust. And trust will suffer if problems go unresolved, right? They may take some time, but again, if you're communicating well, if you're making sure that this is a culture of communication, of two-way, one-on-one communication, that's okay. People understand that things take time. So that's culture, right? So this is how you build a great culture. And great cultures, values-based cultures, drive great brands. Now, but the difference is that culture is the connection mainly to the team member, to the employee, whereas brand is your connection to the customer. This is how you communicate to the customer. Culture is how you communicate to the team. Brand is how you communicate to the customer. And again, it's this continuum, folks. That doesn't change. That doesn't change at all. But so what is a brand? Okay. At Chromium, we describe a brand as a web of experiences. It's a network of memories, and it's woven throughout our psyche. And if there's a touch on any part of that network, I'll give you an example. When I smell vanilla, I think of Ben & Jerry's because they pump that scent of vanilla out onto the sidewalk as you're walking past. So every time I smell vanilla, bing, Ben & Jerry's pops into my mind. And the San Francisco Fire Department shows up. And so that's what a brand is, right? It calls for this brand image. Usually it's the company name or the logo. And so this is not by mistake. This is by design. It's through building a brand strategy. This is how you connect with the customer. This is how you communicate your culture and your values, as well as your product attributes and such to the customer. So how do you arrive at a brand strategy? Well, you have to look at the deep human needs first and foremost, the deep human needs of your customers. Who are they? What are they asking you to do? All right. There's the mission. what is it that your company actually does? And we look at it from a right brain, left brain approach. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. There's the persona that your brand takes on, right? There's the narrative that you're telling people. What's the story that they're going to buy into? There's the vision for the better world that you profess. And then there's this brand essence. What are the 2 or 3 words, that the DNA of your brand? We have something we call the brand Armature. It's a simple 1-page document. This one here is a sample that we did as a demonstration to a trade association called the American Fraternal Alliance. And so if you have everybody in your company making customer communications or customer-facing decisions based on this set of core values that you've outlined earlier, and communicating them using an agreed brand strategy, a very concise brand strategy, there's this thing, it's a multiplier effect. You've got the culture working for you, very efficient, very authentic, very engaged, and then you've got the brand. Again, authentic, more efficient, greater consistency. So what this results in is a better customer experience from both a product standpoint and a service standpoint. So let's move on to our various components here. First of all, you have to know who your audience is or audiences are, and then you have to determine their deep human needs. Deep human needs are something a caveman could understand, even if he couldn't explain them. They are things like status, security, a need for entertainment, a need for growth. These are deep human needs. I'm not talking about the basic human needs such as being cold or hungry. These are the next level up, okay? So a caveman's got to understand these needs, but you have to determine what those needs are. Let's take Subaru, okay? Really great targeting for Subaru. They target families. They talk about families all the time, right? And the best thing is every family. They are really inclusive. Traditional families, liberal families, multiracial families, same-sex families. They go for this idea of family, and they target them with a combination of this eco-friendly outdoorsiness and a sense of caring, right? Their tagline is love. It's what makes a Subaru. And quite frankly, that's what also makes a family a family. Again, no mistake, okay? They developed this culture. It's now driving this brand message. This is very important. Let's talk about mission. People have 2 sides of the brain, right? You have your left side, which is very logical and rational. You have your right side, which is very emotional, very creative. And a great brand appeals to both sides of those. What is the rational function of your company, of your brand? What does it do? From a purely rational perspective, get that down. And then what does it do from an emotional perspective? I'll give you an example. A washer and dryer. What does it do? It gets clothes clean. What does it do from a more emotional perspective? It reassures you that your family is going out into the world looking at the best they can, right? That they have clean clothes. So 2 very separate things. One is very functional, one very emotional. If you put them both together, you can build a great mission statement. Brands assume a persona, right? There's a set of character traits that brands display. And if people learn what this character trait is, what these character traits are, they can portray the brand. They can adopt the persona of the brand whenever they're dealing in any capacity that touches the customer. At Betty Crocker, the cookbook company, for instance, they asked themselves, would Betty do this? What would Betty do? What would Betty say? How would Betty portray this? Is this something Betty would agree with? Right? So they have a persona in their mind. They have a customer. They have a brand persona there, very clear. And you can develop these. We help companies develop these personas that they then adopt whenever they're talking to the customer. Again, that's about consistency. It's about meeting the deep human needs. Now, the next part is brand evidence, right? Why is your brand superior? These are the bests, the onlys, the number ones, the firsts, the strongest, the fastest. What makes your brand better? all right? Because people do indeed use logic to make purchasing decisions. Not all the time, but they do. And then, where did your brand come from? What's the authentic narrative that you're weaving that's so compelling that customers want to buy into it? They're buying into your story. As Simon Sinek has said, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. What's the story here? Why are you doing this? It's very important for you to weave that narrative. It has to be authentic, right? Authentic narratives are great. Levi's. Do I have to say any more about Levi's, right? Another American West story is Wells Fargo, right? This pioneer spirit, the American West. That's the narrative, even though they're just a bank, right? They have ATMs just like any other bank. But why when Norwest acquired Wells Fargo, why didn't they just get rid of Wells Fargo and call it Norwest? Because there's no narrative behind Norwest. And there's no stagecoach that comes with Norwest. So that's why Norwest adopted the Wells Fargo brand. Great narrative, right? Finally, and not quite finally, but one of the other most important things that we help companies do is distill their brand essence. This is the 2 or 3 words, the short phrase that captures the DNA of your brand. It's just shorthand. Everybody can use it. So hallmarks, for instance, is caring shared. Is what I'm doing caring shared? Okay. Look at Virgin. Theirs is giant slayer. Are we slaying the giant or are we doing something else? You know it's on brand if it fits your brand essence. And then most importantly, and again, this is the big tie back to culture, is the brand vision, right? What is it that your company, that your brand is doing to make the world a better place? This is driven by values. It's selfless. For example, Microsoft's brand vision for many years was a PC on every desk and in every home. It didn't say a Microsoft PC, right? Didn't say that it was running Windows, but they envisioned this world that was driven by computing. Lo and behold, it came true. And we're all the better off for it to a certain extent. So again, if you go back to the brand Armature, you'll see all the various pieces there that we talked about. There's the brand essence, the vision, all these things in a single page document that every single employee can use to guide what they're communicating to the customer. Whether they're in product development, customer service, leadership, marketing, it doesn't matter. Everybody can be on brand. Because what are you really doing when you build a brand? You are building trust. This is your brand promise. These things, all these components, that's your promise to customers. Either implicit or explicit, but you have to keep that promise. Now, do you have any doubt that Apple's going to continue to make awesome products that are beautiful, incredible, high quality, unbelievably well designed? No, of course not. You trust them, right? Look at the way that they express this. You understand this promise because Apple expresses their brand in everything they do. Go to an Apple store, that's their obsession with aesthetics. Look at that thing. That's branding from the inside out. Here in San Francisco, Lululemon rolls out the mats on the sidewalk, right? They literally brand from the inside out. They take everything out onto the sidewalk, and they have really great looking fit people in Lululemon outfits doing yoga. There's the promise. You could be one of these people if you bought our clothes. So this is important. This is the brand promise. This is what we're looking to do. Now, Southwest is a great example of how branding from the inside out is driving the identity, the actual logo of Southwest. Look at the old one, right? This is before they started to brand from the inside out. This is outside in branding. Someone came, gave them a logo and said, this is what your logo should be, right? Oh, it works. It says it has an airplane, has our name. What more do we need, right? But look at the new one, because everybody knows about Southwest's culture of loving their customers, of taking great care of their customers, making a fun experience. I mean, that brand is driven from the inside out. The culture is driving the brand. I mean, look at that. Eventually, they're not even going to need the name. We're all going to know what this means, okay? So in the end, what does this do? It drives growth. And what have we learned? The experts say that 17 to 30% companies companies that are focused on culture and brand grow 17% to 30% larger, have higher operating margins, whatever, than their competitors who are not brand or culture focused. We know that culture guides employees, right? It empowers them to do what they think is best because they're relating their actions back to values that they know, that they believe in, that they understand. And then brand is connecting with the customers in the very same way. People, the team is connecting to customers through the brand in a very consistent and very effective manner. So again, you get this multiplier effect. Culture guiding the employees, brand connecting with the customers. So this combination, this inside-out branding, you start by clarifying the core values. You do that first, right? Again, we do it with a combination of an online survey and a workshop. Same with the brand strategy, online survey and a workshop. And then from there, all your brand expressions are going to communicate a consistent values-based brand, and that's tremendously important. Again, if you're looking to achieve this growth, if you want to be 17 to 30% higher operating margin than your competitors, which I believe you do, that's what you're going to do is focus on branding from the inside out.
Hey, Tony.
Yeah, Peter.
Let me just acknowledge that we have some really, really good questions from the audience. And,
sure.
And because we had the difficulties, folks are able to stay on past the top of the hour. You and I can talk about some of them.
Sure. Go ahead and let's talk about those questions.
Yeah, let's. But I understand that we're supposed to be at the top of the hour ending, so if folks are leaving, that's okay. But one question from Bill is saying that in one sense, culture seems to be an enduring element of an organization, yet it also might change over time. So how does an organization recognize the time is right for a change?
Well, I'm going to go back to real-time measurement. There's the opportunity now with these mobile apps to know precisely when it's time to change. Well, maybe not precisely; it's a bit much, but pretty close, right? When you see that the people are less happy, when you see that they're not as engaged, when they don't like where they're working, when they don't feel like they have a good social life at work, when they're not proud of what you do, if they're not willing to recommend a friend work at the company, that's when you know the culture needs work, right? Similarly with customers, you do the same thing with a brand. You measure it all the time. That's when you know the brand, if it's not resonating, then you need to spiff it up.
Yeah, and I think too, if you look at what innovator brands are doing, they are fixing things that don't appear to be broken. They're addressing things every few years, like every 3 to 5 years, and changing things. So if it's been a while since you had a brand assessment where you had the employees involved in some culture building activity, I don't mean going out and climbing ropes and things like that. I mean real conversations that again are meant to root out this insidious poison that exists, where people are if they're resenting each other in the silos. It's what they say about resentment, right? It's like poison, but you're taking the poison, you yourself. So if that's evident in your organization, whether you're a new company or an old company, that's when you've got to address it, and it's got to start at the very top.
Yeah, I agree. Leadership has to really, like I said, leadership has to live those cultural values, and has to fix things that are broken, or else there won't be any trust.
We have another question.
Yeah.
We have another question from Rick. Is it possible for a traditional company to reinvent itself, or is it more common to start out as an innovative company? Most traditional companies bolt on stuff like mobile and digital strategies versus digital mobile first. Another way of saying this is that real change has to be deep in the DNA versus the surface.
I think that,
it's funny. I think, well, you can answer a different way than I, but I do think that there are some traditional companies that I've seen in different industries that are beginning to innovate out of a sense of urgency, because they're seeing themselves slowly circling the drain, if you will. Because
Yeah,
again, most companies are status quo companies. They're doing fine. They appear to be doing fine, but yet because they're not innovating, they're slowly circling the drain. And depending on what industry they're in, they could be circling quicker than the other one. And yet, new companies too can also be status quo thinkers if they're
sure.
just beginning but not thinking in innovative ways.
Yeah, there's a Quo brand born every day, and we all know that change is hard. I mean, we've seen it, Peter. We've seen companies that have promised that they're becoming innovators, uh, and when they get too close to the actual innovation, suddenly it's too scary and they back off. It's just not in their DNA. But I do believe that the right leadership and building the right team, it may take some time, but as long as the values are there, so the values are driving the organization. If one of the values is innovation, is this kind of this energy, this excitement. If if everybody on the team agrees that this is a value and leadership upholds those values and fixes things that are broke, that are not adhering to those values, then change can happen. It happens slowly, but it does happen. And then once the changes happen in the culture, you can communicate that to your customers through the brand. So I believe it can be done. I've seen it done. We had a company that was a highly technical company, and they had this long technical, terrible name, that they had actually shortened into a three-letter abbreviation, and we got in there. They had new leadership. They had a new team, and they said, we want to take this company to a new level. So we actually came up with a great strategy, whole new name, new identity, amazing transformation. And what it did for the company, what it did for their customers was nothing short of revolutionary. So again, leadership and a great team. And then having those values codified and upheld, and then having that strategy codified and consistently expressed. That's how change is brought about.
Okay, maybe one more from Whitney. What is the connection between values and value?
Ah, very good, Whitney. The connection between values and value, well, that is because a values-driven company, by its very nature, will have a stronger brand. And stronger brands can command premium pricing when you have, if we're talking about value to the customer. And so when you have premium pricing, you then have more profit, obviously, that you can plow back into making your products better and better and better. I just read this interesting article today, Joe Nocera in the New York Times, and he wrote how there are a couple of cut rate companies, cut rate, low price leader type companies in back east that have decided that paying their employees more actually saves them money because they retain better talent and they're more efficient and the customer gets a better experience. So they're actually able to keep the prices low. Again, these are like Quickie Mart. I think one of them is called Quickie Mart. The other one is called like Macedonia or something like that. I've not heard of these companies, but here they are. They're low price leaders like Costco, low price leaders like Aldi or any of these other sort of low price leader companies, Walmart. But they're paying their employees more because the culture and the values that this company espouses are building a brand that's so great, so efficient, so attractive to customers. It's building loyalty both inside and outside, and so values drive strong brands. They attract and retain better talent. Then you're able to provide your customers with better value. How was that?
We could talk some more later about that for sure. Thanks everybody for hanging in there with us. Just one more question of interest. We got a couple of related questions about the risk, regulatory exposure if employees are overly engaged, and also innovation being defined as working in the unknown and the risk involved with that. So how do you convince a Quo company to adopt and embrace this rather scary paradigm?
Yeah,
the risk of working in the unknown.
Well, it's about transparency. And again, I talked about medium, this holacracy. If you look at where everybody, there's a culture of trust. HubSpot shares their financials with employees on a regular basis. That's scary, but
Yeah.
it builds trust.
I've seen even smaller agents and brokers in the insurance space do the same thing, and their employees are happier. All the cards on the table. That may not be for everybody. But.
Sure. Again, it's part of being able to visualize the path forward for the company, for yourself. But in terms of regulatory issues, that's a challenge. If you're in a heavily regulated industry, some of this may not be possible. But I think that a lot of that regulation is self-regulation. And it takes transformational leadership, as you've noted, to make transformational change within these companies. And so I think that it comes down to the leaders following the right path.
Yeah, that to me is the key out of all those four things that we talked about: brand, culture, leadership, and engagement. To me, the leadership, the transformational as opposed to transactional, is the key point.
Yeah.
Because with transformational leadership, you are literally transforming the careers and lives of these people. You are literally having them see the better world that you envision, as you talked about with the concept of vision, and where they might fit in with that future path. You're painting a picture of the future. And when you do that, there is an unknown. But in many ways, you're not saying, oh, let's go do some scary stuff. You're saying to your people, let's do this together. Let's find some new ways to do things. And you're empowering people.
Sure.
And that culture, that environment, you'll be surprised internally at what your folks can come up with. They thought their job was to do X. Well, yeah, maybe that's important to the financial integrity of the company. But maybe X, Y, and Z are some interesting new areas that they can go in. If they're empowered.
Again, empowered and having it so that there's a set of values that people buy into, that are customized to your culture, and making sure that leadership upholds those values so that people can feel confident making decisions based on those values. They'll be more efficient, they'll be happier, they will make better decisions, and then having it so that those values inform that this culture drives a unified, consistent brand strategy. It's all communicated to the customer then. And I think this is the crux. This is branding from the inside out, and it's why it's so effective, because it's authentic, it's powerful, and it has the support, the enthusiastic consensus of all the people, both inside and outside of the company.
Yeah. Well, again, thanks to the 115 of you that hung out with us to the very bitter end here, and apologize for the technical issues. And we hope to host a few more webinars later this year.
Right. And in the meantime, you can visit Chromium at chromiumbranding.com. You can learn more about Culture Pulse at culturepulse.io. And also happy to take any emails, calls, bricks through the window, whatever anybody would like to say. We're always happy to hear from you. And thank you all very much for joining us. And I think that ends this webinar. Look forward to the next one.
Thank you.